Hey there, students. Tom Richey here with Fiveable. Thank you for joining me for a quick review of Renaissance Humanist for the AP European History exam. And of course, there are other tests that you could be studying for that this could help you if you stumbled across this video by accident. This is kind of a who's who of the Renaissance, and I am going to quickly review 7 Renaissance humanists. Now, these aren't all of them. There are certainly others that you could use as examples. If you're writing an essay, you might have studied others, but I believe that these 7 are all going to be very helpful and possibly some of the most likely for you to encounter on an exam or have the opportunity to use as evidence in an essay. Now, since there are 7, I'm going to divide them into 3 groups. That way, this is easily digestible. So we've got the men of letters, the civic humanist, and the Christian humanist. So starting off with the men of letters, Petrarch, Pico, and Valla. These were humanists that studied the classics for intellectual fulfillment. There really wasn't an ulterior motive for studying the classics, and these are people who are really just nerding out to the ancient Greeks and Romans. Now, then you have the civic humanists, Machiavelli and Castiglione, and these are people who studied the classics for political advancement, people who believed that the thing that we get out of the classics in a classical education is to be prepared for careers in politics. And then finally, the Christian humanist of the Northern Renaissance, Erasmus and Thomas More, and they studied the classics in an attempt to improve and critique society. Now, note the Christian humanists, these are the Northern Renaissance humanists. Now, all of these humanists, practically, at least to some degree or another, were Christians, but these people had less of a secular approach. In the Italian Renaissance, we see more of an embrace of the secularism of this Renaissance culture. So, starting off with the men of letters. First of all, you have Petrarch. Now, Petrarch is best known as the father of humanism, and for recovering forgotten writings of Cicero, also wrote letters to Cicero. He wrote an epic poem called Africa about Scipio Africanus, a great Roman general, and he won Poet Laureate. He won this award for his efforts. Now, laureate, this is someone who is a victor, poet victor, and he was obsessed with a woman named Laura, but he's known for writing several works such as Africa, the Canzonieri, lots of letters. But the main thing you want to know about Petrarch is that he was the father of humanism, and he's seen this way because he started turning attention to these writings of Cicero that had really been neglected in the late Middle Ages. Pico della Mirandola wrote a book of 900 theses. He had Martin Luther beat, but the preface to this book of 900 theses was what we call the Oration on the Dignity of Man, which has been referred to as the manifesto of the Renaissance, and an expression of humanist philosophy to the extent that there is one. Now, we want to be careful in terms of thinking about a single humanist philosophy, but certainly the idea that we arrive at truth by putting the classical tradition together with the Christian tradition, something known as syncretism, and the idea of free will, that people can ultimately determine what it is that they are going to be. And that's why Pico says that man is at the center of God's creation, because animals and angels pretty much have their jobs defined for them, and it's only the human being who gets to be what he wills to be. Then there's Lorenzo Valla, who is best known for writing The False Donation of Constantine. Now, this is an example of textual criticism or philology. This is where you look at words and you do historical analysis, textual analysis, what kind of language is being used here. So what he concluded was looking at things that are referenced here and looking at the syntax and the language, that this donation of Constantine, this letter from the Emperor Constantine to the Pope saying, hey, I want you to rule central Italy, that this is a myth. Valla used humanist tactics, okay, as far as his humanist scholarship, to criticize this text and show people that there's really no way that this text is authentic, that it could have been written when it was written and by who is claimed to have written it. So that is an example of really what you see happening in the Renaissance, that we're rediscovering the classics and becoming more familiar with the ancient Greek and Latin languages. Now for the civic humanists, we have Machiavelli and Castiglione. Now, civic humanism is about, again, preparing for a career in public life and using the classics that way. Now, Machiavelli wrote The Prince, which was a handbook for strong rulers, a humanist endeavor because he was inspired by the examples of Roman emperors, who may not have always been the nicest people and certainly not the most Christian people, but they got the job done and they ruled large empires. While in Machiavelli's day, Italy was fragmented into various city-states and principalities. So Machiavelli wrote things like the end justifies the means, kind of an amoral approach that whatever it is that you're trying to get, tunnel vision, all right? And then once you've got it, doesn't matter how you got there. And it's better to be feared than loved. Now remember that Machiavelli is not about being cruel or being hated. There are certain things that Machiavelli says, stay away from your subjects' property and their women, but other than that, you want to make sure that they have a healthy fear of you, because if you count on them loving you, they'll only love you until you do something that they don't like. So as far as that goes, then you go to Castiglione, who wrote the Courtier, or the Book of the Courtier, as it's often called. And not many people are going to be rulers. Many more people will find themselves serving a ruler in that ruler's court. So the Courtier is a courtesy book, and it's about how to win the trust of a ruler and a guide to gentlemanly conduct. And also there's a section in here that addresses ladylike behavior. So these are both books that are written inspired by the classics, and they are aimed at making someone a success in public life. And then we've got the Christian humanist of the Northern Renaissance. Now note that this humanism is more directly inspired by Christianity. These northern humanists, Erasmus and Thomas More, who were pretty much BFFs. Erasmus wrote The Praise of Folly, in which he personified folly in the classical style to criticize institutions, taking an idea like the Romans had Cupid, and the Greeks and the Romans had the Muses. So inspiration is personified. And so folly here is personified in the classical style, and he's modeling this after classical satires. And he criticized the Catholic Church from within. Now, note that he's not criticizing Catholic doctrines, but only church practices. He's looking at the Bible, which is a humanist endeavor. This is a classical text. And he sees that the apostles are poor. And so if the apostles are poor and today's bishops aim to be like the apostles, then why are the bishops so rich, he asks. So this is an example of Northern humanism, this Christian humanist approach that is trying to improve society. Thomas More in Utopia, which means no place, he probably doesn't think this ideal society will ever exist, but he uses this to criticize a lot of things in his society, things like the excessive use of capital punishment and what he viewed as excessive greed and unfair distributions of wealth. And he is modeling this after Plato's Republic. Remember that Plato had the idea of the ideal state, and so Thomas More is pursuing this as well and using humanist studies for social commentary. So that's really the essence of Christian humanism. So remember, with the Renaissance humanists, we've got the men of letters, the Italian nerds, so to speak. Then the civic humanists, also Italian, Machiavelli and Castiglione, who are studying the classics for political advancement. And then finally, we have Erasmus and Thomas More, who are Northern humanists or Christian humanists, and they're studying the classics to improve society. And that's it for this one, but Fiveable's got plenty more for you. Subscribe to the channel or check out fiveable.me. And remember, think Fiveable on social media. Ladies and gentlemen, this year is Fiveable.